Rachel Morgan, a single mother in quiet Brookfield, Vermont, carries the weight of her firefighter father's legacy. Working as an emergency dispatcher, she vows to avoid danger for her daughter Sophie. One freezing night, Rachel spots a cabin ablaze and, against warnings, risks everything to save a trapped boy, Ethan. Barefoot and bleeding, she vanishes before anyone can thank her, leaving only a singed bracelet. As whispers of her heroism spread, Rachel hides her scars and resigns, unaware that Ethan's drawings keep her memory alive. Years later, a billionaire's search for her sparks a mystery that could change everything. Inspired by Rachel's quiet courage? Share your own stories of bravery in the comments. Like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell for more incredible tales of everyday heroes. Support us to keep shining a light on unsung acts of kindness and sacrifice. Thank you. The acrid smoke curled thickly into the night sky, a suffocating shroud that muffled the desperate shouts echoing through the chaos. "Don't go in! The roof's gonna collapse!" Voices cried, hoarse with panic. But Rachel Morgan didn't falter. Barefoot, her soul stung against the icy snow, each step a jolt of pain she barely registered. Blood trickled down her arms, warm and slick, mingling with the ash that clung to her skin and dusted her hair like a grim snowfall. Behind her, flames roared, licking hungrily at the crumbling structure. With a fierce cry, she drove her elbow through the jagged remains of a window, glass shattering like her own frayed nerves. She emerged moments later, a small boy cradled in her trembling arms, his whimpers barely audible over the fire's relentless crackle. She set him down on the frozen ground, her breath ragged, her body shaking from adrenaline and cold. Before anyone could stammer their thanks or even ask her name, Rachel was gone, vanishing into the smoky darkness. All she left behind were footprints etched in the snow and a singed cotton bracelet, its frayed edges smoldering faintly. 2 decades later, a billionaire would scour the globe, driven by an obsession to find her. Who was this woman, this fleeting savior who had slipped away without a trace? And why did her act of courage ripple through time, pulling a stranger into her orbit? Rachel Morgan's world was a small one, nestled in the heart of Brookfield, Vermont, a town so quaint it seemed lifted from a postcard. Main Street was a ribbon of familiarity where every passerby offered a wave or a nod. The barbershop, with its faded red and white pole, had stood unchanged for 40 years, its chairs worn smooth by generations of gossip and laughter. Each winter, the town square transformed into a living snow globe, with twinkling lights and children's laughter swirling through the frosty air. Yet beneath this idyllic surface, Rachel carried a tempest no one could see, a storm of grief and resolve that churned within her heart. At 29, Rachel was a single mother, pouring every ounce of her strength into raising her 5-year-old daughter, Sophie. Their home was a modest 2-bedroom apartment perched above a bakery, where the scent of fresh bread drifted up through the floorboards each morning. Rachel worked the night shift as an emergency dispatcher, her voice a lifeline for those caught in life's cruelest moments. To the callers on the other end, panicked, sobbing, or numb with shock, she was a beacon of calm, a steady hand guiding them through their darkest hours. But few knew the toll it took, how she stitched herself back together after each call, her composure a fragile mask she wore for Sophie's sake. Their apartment was a gallery of Sophie's imagination, its walls adorned with her vibrant drawings, stick-figure princesses with crooked crowns, lopsided rainbows arching across smudged skies, and endless sketches of the two of them, hand in hand, smiling under a sun that always shone. Amid this burst of color, one item stood apart, a quiet anchor in Rachel's world, an old photograph in a simple wooden frame on her nightstand. It captured her father, Mark Morgan, in his firefighter's uniform, standing proud before Engine 3. His smile was warm, but his eyes held a depth of weariness, as if he'd glimpsed truths he couldn't unsee. That photo was the last taken before he was stolen from Dean, a frozen moment of a man who'd given everything. Mark Morgan had been Brookfield's hero, a firefighter whose courage was woven into the town's lore. One crisp October afternoon, when a daycare center erupted in flames, he charged into the inferno without hesitation. He saved every child inside, carrying them out one by one as the fire consumed the building. But the cost was his own life, a sacrifice that left a 12-year-old Rachel staring into a void she couldn't comprehend. His funeral was a spectacle of sorrow, the largest the town had ever seen. Fire engines lined the streets in a solemn parade, their sirens silent. Men and women in crisp uniforms saluted as a folded flag was pressed into her mother's trembling hands. At the center of it all stood Rachel, a small girl clutching her father's helmet, its weight a crushing reminder of a loss too vast for her young heart to hold. She didn't yet grasp what forever meant, but she felt its ache in every fiber of her being. As she grew, Rachel vowed to carve a different path, one far from the flames and sirens that had claimed her father. She dreamed of a safe life, free of the anguish she'd seen in her mother's eyes, free of the dread that haunted families waiting in doorways for loved ones who might never return. For a time, that dream felt within reach. She fell in love, married young, and welcomed Sophie, a bright, inquisitive girl whose smile echoed her grandfather's. But when Sophie was 2, Rachel's husband walked away, leaving her to face a life she'd never chosen. Alone, she stood at the edge of her shattered plans, staring down a future that felt impossibly heavy. That was when she became a dispatcher, a role she told herself was a compromise. She wasn't running into burning buildings or facing the fire's wrath. Instead, she was the voice in the storm, the calm that steadied trembling hands and racing hearts. If a quiet part of her longed to honor her father's memory, to keep his legacy alive in her own way, she buried that truth deep, never giving it voice. Her nights were grueling, filled with the raw pulse of a small town's emergencies, heart attacks that stole breaths in the dark, cars skidding on icy roads, domestic disputes that left her hands trembling long after the line went silent. Yet she held fast, driven by the knowledge that people depended on her, and that Sophie needed her to come home whole. But beneath her steady exterior, fear gnawed at Rachel's core, a relentless shadow that stalked her in the quiet hours before dawn. When she slipped off her shoes and tiptoed into Sophie's room, watching her daughter's chest rise and fall in peaceful sleep, questions haunted her. If faced with the same moment her father had known, the choice between safety and sacrifice, what would she do? Could she summon the courage to run into the fire, to risk everything for a stranger? Or had years of loss and caution made her smaller, more guarded? She wrestled with these thoughts in silence, her heart a battlefield of doubt and determination. That week, Sophie had taped a new drawing to the fridge, a burst of crayon colors that stopped Rachel in her tracks. It showed a stick figure Sophie beaming wide beside Rachel and a tall figure in a red truck, a badge glinting on his chest. Beneath in Sophie's wobbly handwriting were the words, Grandpa Mark. Rachel's breath caught, her fingers tracing the lines her daughter had drawn. In that simple image, she saw the weight of her father's legacy, the love Sophie held for a man she'd never met, and the unspoken question that lingered in her own heart. Was she brave enough to carry his fire forward? On a bitter December night, the kind where the cold seemed to breathe, creeping through every crack and shaking the bare trees like brittle bones, Rachel drove home from her late shift. Her breath clouded the windshield, her fingers tight on the steering wheel, as her headlights cut a pale path through the snow-covered road. Exhaustion weighed on her, heavy and familiar, but her thoughts were with Sophie, her 6-year-old daughter, safe at Mrs. Holloway's house. The neighbor's kindness was a lifeline on nights like this, when Rachel's dispatcher job stretched into the early hours. She pictured Sophie's small, warm body climbing into bed beside her in the morning, a quiet promise that kept her going. The apartment would be cold, silent, but Rachel didn't care. She longed for the moment she could slip under the covers and steal a few hours of sleep before the world demanded her again. Rachel didn't see herself as brave. She was just a woman navigating life's relentless demands, paying bills, zipping Sophie's coat against the morning chill, holding their fragile world together with sheer will. But in the quiet of night, when Sophie slept and the house was still, Rachel would trace her fingers over the old photo on her nightstand. Her father, forever 35, smiled back at her, his eyes alight with a courage she both admired and feared. In those moments, she felt the weight of legacy, as if Sophie's clumsy kindergarten drawings, taped to the fridge, carried echoes of something greater. She wondered, with a quiet ache, if she'd know what to do when her moment came, when she had to choose. As she rounded the curve onto Pinerest Road, a strange glow pierced the darkness. flickering through the skeletal pines. At first she thought it was moonlight catching on ice, a fleeting winter illusion. But as she drew closer, the light pulsed orange, unnatural and menacing. Her heart stuttered, a primal fear tightening her chest. She slowed, rolling down the window, and the sharp, acrid smell of smoke flooded the car. Her stomach twisted. She yanked the car to the side, tires crunching into a snowbank, and stumbled out, barefoot in the snow, her shoes forgotten in the panic. Ahead, a wooden cabin was consumed by flames, fire licking up its sides, thick black smoke spiraling into the night sky like a living thing. Her dispatcher instincts kicked in before fear could take hold. Hands shaking, she grabbed her phone and called it in, her voice steady despite the dread clawing at her. Structure fire on Pinerest, west of the curve. Cabin fully engulfed. Get units here fast. But as she stepped into the biting cold, the snow stinging her bare feet, she saw something that stopped her heart. A small face pressed against a window. A boy no older than Sophie, his fists pounding the glass, his mouth open in a silent scream. The front door was a wall of flames, an impassable barrier. Neighbors had gathered, clutching their coats against the wind, some shouting, others frozen in horror. A man's voice broke through. "The propane tank's in the back!" Another, shrill with panic, cried, "The fire trucks won't make it in time!" Rachel's pulse roared in her throat, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. She wasn't a hero, just a mother who knew the weight of loss, who carried her father's bravery like a stone in her chest. An older woman grabbed her arm, her grip desperate, her voice trembling. "Don't go in, honey. You've got a little girl. Think of her." The words cut deep, stirring a storm of fear and duty. Sophie's face flashed in her mind, her daughter's laughter, her tiny hand in hers. But another voice, her own, faint and resolute, whispered, "Not one more child, not if I can help it." Her father's reckless, fearless smile flickered before her, urging her forward. The crowd's shouts faded into a dull hum as Rachel tore off her coat, wrapping it around her arm like a shield. Someone yelled, "The roof's gonna give!" But the warning was drowned by the fire's ferocious roar. The snow bit at her bare feet, sharp and unrelenting, but adrenaline numbed the pain. She circled the cabin, eyes scanning for any opening. On the east side, the flames hadn't yet reached the window, a fragile chance at survival. She didn't hesitate. Tightening the coat around her arm, she smashed it through the glass. Shards sliced into her skin, blood welling instantly, but the pain was a distant echo against the urgency screaming in her veins. Smoke poured out, thick and choking, burning her eyes and searing her lungs. She hoisted herself through, knees slamming into the floor. Inside, the heat was a living force, pressing against her, suffocating and relentless. The air was thick with ash, bitter and unyielding. Dropping to her hands and knees, Rachel crawled forward. Her voice hoarse as she called out, "Where are you?" A faint, terrified cry answered, a small, broken sound from beneath a nearby table. Her heart lurched, a tangle of dread and determination driving her forward. The smoke blinded her, her lungs burning with every breath, but her hands found him. A boy curled tight in his singed pajamas, his face streaked with soot and tears. His wide, frightened eyes met hers, and in that moment, Rachel saw Sophie, her daughter's face, her daughter's fear. She wouldn't let this child become another ghost in her life. The icy wind howled outside as Rachel clutched the trembling boy to her chest, his small body quaking with fear. His tears soaked into her torn shirt, each sob a piercing reminder of the danger they were in. Her heart pounded, not just from the exertion, but from the overwhelming urge to protect him, to shield him from the nightmare unfolding around them. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread of calm amidst the chaos. She tore a strip from her already shredded shirt and wrapped it gently around his mouth, shielding him from the choking smoke that filled the room. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest. Her arms burned from cuts and blisters. Her legs ached from the weight of their escape, but she refused to falter. The shattered window loomed ahead, a jagged promise of freedom. Behind them, the fire roared, and a deafening crack split the air as part of the ceiling gave way. Burning embers rained down, singeing the floor and her bare feet, but Rachel didn't hesitate. With a surge of desperation, she dragged the boy toward the window, her strength waning, but her resolve unbreakable. Summoning the last reserves of her energy, Rachel hoisted the boy through the broken window, her arms trembling under his weight. Outside, hands reached up to catch him, pulling him to safety. For a fleeting moment, the world seemed to pause, the crackling of the fire and the sting of the cold fading into silence. Then, with a final burst of effort, Rachel clambered through the window herself, her body racked with coughs, her skin raw and bleeding. She collapsed onto the snow-covered ground, her chest heaving as she gulped in the frigid air. Neighbors rushed forward, their voices a blur of concern as they draped blankets over the boy's shivering form. Rachel's vision blurred, not just from the smoke, but from the weight of what she'd just done. Before anyone could approach her, before a single word of gratitude could be spoken, she turned away. Barefoot, her feet numb against the snow, she walked silently back to her car. Slipping into the driver's seat, she drove off into the night, leaving only a trail of footprints in a singed cotton bracelet, fallen from her wrist, glinting faintly in the snow like a whispered secret. The next morning, the small town of Brookfield buzzed with hushed speculation. The fire on Pinerest Road had shaken the quiet community, and stories of the mysterious woman who had braved the flames spread like wildfire. At the bakery, the gas station, the post office, neighbors exchanged tales of the barefoot, bleeding figure who had vanished before the fire trucks arrived. Some called her an angel, a divine savior sent to protect the boy. Others speculated she was a drifter, a transient soul who had stumbled into an act of heroism. No one connected the dots to Rachel Morgan, the unassuming woman who had always blended into the background of their town. Rachel sat alone at her kitchen table, a mug of coffee growing cold in front of her. Her hands, wrapped in clean gauze, trembled slightly. Not from the pain of the 15 stitches in her arm or the burns snaking across her forearms, but from the weight of her silence. She told the ER nurse it was a kitchen accident, a clumsy mishap with a knife in a hot pan. She told her boss she was just feeling under the weather, her voice steady despite the exhaustion pulling at her bones. But her body told a different story. The cuts, the burns, the bruises, they were a map of her courage, a truth she couldn't share. When her daughter Sophie came home from Mrs. Holloway's, Rachel was curled up on the couch, a blanket pulled tight to hide her injuries. Sophie clambered into her lap, her preschool chatter a bright spark in the dimness of Rachel's world. She proudly showed off a new drawing, a stick figure version of their apartment, with Rachel's ponytail and Sophie in a bright pink dress. In the corner, a small figure in a red truck caught Rachel's eye. "Grandpa Mark," Sophie said, pointing. Rachel's heart clenched, a sharp pang of grief for her father mingling with her own unspoken pain. She kissed Sophie's head, murmuring, "Mommy's just tired today, sweetheart." But the weight pressing on her chest was far more than fatigue. At the dispatch center where Rachel worked, questions were already swirling. Security footage from a gas station near Pinerest Road showed her car heading toward the fire, even though she'd signed off her shift late that night. Her supervisor, Frank, called her into his office. His tone was measured but firm. "We're proud of you, Rachel," he said, his eyes lingering on her bandaged arms. "But you can't just leave your post, even off the clock. Procedures matter." She sat there, arms folded tightly in her lap, nodding mechanically. She knew no explanation would satisfy the rigid rules of protocol. By the end of the week, she'd taken unpaid leave. By the end of the month, she'd quietly resigned, her world shrinking as the bills piled higher. To make ends meet, she took night shifts at the bakery, kneading dough with hands still tender from burns, packing boxes with arms that ached with every movement. The bakery owner, Mr. Jensen, never asked about her scars, and for that small kindness, Rachel was quietly grateful. Across town, another story was unfolding. Ethan Walker, the boy Rachel had saved, was grappling with his own silent battles. His parents had died in a car crash the previous year, leaving him in the care of his grandmother, Miriam Walker. That night, Miriam had been working her nursing shift when faulty Christmas lights sparked the fire that nearly claimed Ethan's life. Now the boy was a shadow of himself, his words reduced to whispers, his eyes heavy with the weight of smoke and fear. But something stirred within him, a flicker of light amidst the darkness. He began to draw, on napkins, on scraps of paper, on the backs of grocery lists. Always the same image, a woman with a ponytail, tears streaming down her face, and distinctive marks on her arms. His grandmother, Miriam, watched him with growing concern, her heart aching as she tried to coax answers from him. But Ethan's voice remained locked away, his drawings the only window into his fragile world. "She saved me," he would whisper, his small hands clutching the crayon as if it could summon her back. The acrid smell of smoke still clung to Rachel's skin, even hours after she'd escaped the inferno. Her heart pounded in her chest, a frantic rhythm that matched the terrified whimpers of the boy clinging to her. His small hands gripped her torn shirt, his eyes wide with a fear so raw it mirrored her own. "It's gonna be okay, sweetheart," Rachel whispered, her voice hoarse but steady, as she tore a strip from her already shredded blouse and pressed it gently over his mouth to shield him from the choking fumes. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest, raw from exertion and seared by the heat, but she refused to falter. Dragging the boy across the splintered floor, she fixed her gaze on the jagged outline of the broken window ahead, their only chance at salvation. A deafening crack shattered the air, and Rachel's heart lurched as the ceiling behind them gave way, sending a cascade of burning embers raining down. The floor glowed with smoldering patches, but she didn't dare look back. Her arms trembled as she hoisted the boy through the window, her strength waning but fueled by a desperate resolve. Outside, hands reached for him, strangers, neighbors, their faces blurred in the chaos. And for a fleeting moment, the world seemed to pause, holding its breath as the boy was pulled to safety. Rachel scrambled through the window after him, her body racked with coughs, her skin stinging from cuts and burns, her bare feet sinking into the icy snow. She was alive, but the weight of the night pressed heavily on her chest. Neighbors surged forward, wrapping the boy in blankets, their voices a jumble of gratitude and shock. But Rachel didn't linger to hear their words. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her body trembling not just from the cold, but from the overwhelming urge to flee. Without a word, she turned, her bare feet leaving faint impressions in the snow as she stumbled toward her car. She slid into the driver's seat, her hands shaking so violently she could barely grip the keys. As she drove into the night, the glow of the fire faded in her rearview mirror, leaving behind only her footprints and a singed cotton bracelet that had slipped from her wrist, now lying forgotten in the snow, like a whisper of her presence. By morning, the small town of Brookfield was alive with murmurs. The fire on Pinerest Road had shaken the community, and stories of the mysterious woman who'd saved a child spread like wildfire. At the bakery, the gas station, the post office, neighbors traded theories over steaming coffee cups. Some called her an angel, sent by divine intervention. Others speculated she was a drifter, a fleeting hero who'd stumbled into their quiet lives. No one thought of Rachel Morgan, the unassuming woman who'd lived among them for years, her existence as unremarkable as the gray skies overhead. Rachel sat alone at her kitchen table, staring at a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. Her hands, now wrapped in clean gauze, trembled slightly, betraying the pain she refused to acknowledge. The cuts from the shattered glass had required 15 stitches, and the burns on her forearms throbbed beneath the bandages. She told the ER nurse it was a clumsy kitchen mishap, a lie that slipped out as easily as her excuse to her boss about feeling under the weather. But her body told a different story, one of jagged glass, suffocating smoke, and a fear so visceral it still lingered in her bones. When her daughter Sophie came home from Mrs. Holloway's, Rachel was curled on the couch, a blanket draped over her to hide the bandages and the exhaustion etched into her face. Sophie clambered into her lap, her preschool chatter filling the room with a warmth Rachel desperately needed. She showed off a new drawing, their apartment, a stick figure, Rachel with her familiar ponytail, Sophie in a bright pink dress. In the corner, a small figure in a red truck caught Rachel's eye. Grandpa Mark. Her heart clenched, a pang of grief slicing through her. "Mommy's just tired today, sweetheart," she murmured, pressing a kiss to Sophie's head, though the weight pressing on her was far heavier than fatigue. At the dispatch center where Rachel worked, questions were already swirling. Security footage from a gas station near Pinerest Road showed her car heading toward the fire, despite her having signed off her shift late. Her supervisor, Frank, called her into his office, his tone a mix of pride and caution. "We're proud of you, Rachel," he said, his eyes searching hers. But you can't just leave your post, even off duty. Procedures are there for a reason. Rachel sat across from him, her bandaged arms folded tightly in her lap, nodding as if his words made sense. But inside, she felt a quiet rebellion. No protocol could capture the instinct that had driven her into that burning house. No rule could measure the cost of what she'd done. By the end of the week, she'd taken unpaid leave. By the end of the month, she'd resigned, her world shrinking as bills piled up and her savings dwindled. To keep afloat, Rachel took night shifts at the bakery, her burned hands kneading dough, her sore arms packing boxes under the fluorescent lights. The owner, Mr. Jensen, never pried about the scars that peeked out from her sleeves, and for that, she was silently grateful. The work was grueling, but it was a refuge, a place where no one asked questions, where she could lose herself in the rhythm of flour and heat. Across town, another story was unfolding. Ethan Walker, the boy Rachel had saved, was grappling with his own silent scars. Orphaned by a car crash the previous year, he lived with his grandmother, Miriam, who'd been working a nursing shift when faulty Christmas lights sparked the fire that nearly claimed his life. Since that night, Ethan had retreated into himself, his words reduced to faint whispers, his eyes haunted by the memory of smoke and flames. But something stirred within him when he picked up a crayon. On napkins, scraps of paper, the backs of grocery lists, he drew the same image over and over. A woman with a ponytail, tears streaking her face and distinctive marks on her arms. Miriam tried to coax answers from him, her heart aching as she watched her grandson wrestle with his trauma, but all Ethan would offer was a quiet, "She saved me." In the biting cold of a winter night, Miriam stumbled upon a small cotton bracelet half buried in the snow outside the cabin. Its edges were charred, the colorful threads scorched and frayed, yet it retained the clumsy charm of a child's creation, woven with beads and love. For Ethan, her grandson, this wasn't just a trinket. It was a lifeline, a tangible reminder of the night he was seen, chosen, and saved. Every night he slipped it under his pillow, his small fingers brushing against its rough texture as if it could anchor him to the memory of the woman who carried him from the flames. To Ethan, the bracelet was more than a keepsake. It was proof that someone had risked everything for him, a quiet promise that he wasn't alone in the world. Back in the city, Rachel Morgan's life had settled into a rhythm that masked her inner turmoil. The wounds from that night had healed, but they left behind silver scars that snaked across her skin like faint, shimmering rivers. These marks were silent witnesses to a night she kept locked away, a secret she guarded as fiercely as she protected her daughter, Sophie. In the sweltering heat of summer, Rachel wore long sleeves concealing the scars from curious eyes. She folded the memory of that night as meticulously as she folded the aprons at the bakery where she worked, or Sophie's tiny clothes, tucking it away, pressing it flat, making it small enough to bear. She told herself it was enough to move forward, to focus on the present, on Sophie's laughter, the hum of the oven, the routine of daily life. But in the stillness of the night, when Sophie slept and the apartment was cloaked in silence, Rachel's resolve wavered. Her fingers would trace the scars and her mind would drift back to the boy's face, illuminated by the flickering firelight. She could still hear his shallow breaths as she carried him through the snow, feel the sharp sting of glass biting into her skin, and the weight of his small, trembling body in her arms. She hadn't expected anyone to know what she'd done. She didn't crave thanks or recognition. Rachel understood a truth the world often overlooked. The greatest acts of courage are often the quietest, performed without fanfare or witnesses. They leave behind only footprints in the snow, a singed bracelet, and a heart forever changed. Years passed like chapters in a book, each one etching its mark on Ethan Walker's soul. In the small town of Brookfield, he was known as the boy who survived the fire, the lucky one. But survival carried a weight heavier than anyone could see. Ethan rarely spoke of that night, letting his emotions spill onto the pages of his sketchbooks instead. Page after page, he drew her, the woman with the ponytail, her face etched in his memory with a clarity that refused to fade. His therapist called it a coping mechanism, a way to process the trauma. His grandmother, Miriam, called it a miracle, a testament to the woman who had given him a second chance at life. The bracelet, singed and fragile, became Ethan's most treasured possession. Miriam placed it in a small wooden box, which Ethan kept under his bed. On nights when nightmares clawed at him, when the fear of losing someone else gripped his heart, he would pull out the box, clutch the bracelet, and whisper to himself, "She came back for me." Those words were his shield, a reminder that someone had fought for him when the world was burning. As Ethan grew, the woman in his drawings became more than a memory. She became a symbol of courage, a beacon guiding him toward a life of purpose. He wanted to understand what it meant to be brave, to live up to the sacrifice she had made. That determination shaped him into a protector, a quiet defender of those around him. At school, when bullies targeted a classmate, Ethan stepped in, his voice steady despite the fear in his chest. When a friend struggled with math, he stayed late, patiently explaining until the concepts clicked. When teachers needed help stacking chairs or organizing supplies, Ethan was there. His small acts of kindness stacking up like bricks in the foundation of who he was becoming. Miriam watched with quiet pride as the boy who once woke screaming from nightmares grew into a young man others could rely on. She saw the strength in his heart, the way he carried the weight of his survival with grace. But hardship was a shadow that never fully retreated. When Ethan was 14, Miriam's health began to falter. Her once steady hands trembled, and her warm voice grew faint. One winter night, as snow fell softly outside, Ethan sat by her bedside holding her frail hand. Her eyes, though dimmed by illness, still held the fierce love that had raised him. "You have a gift, Ethan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Don't waste it, and someday, find her." Those words sank into him, rooting themselves in his heart. When Miriam passed, Ethan was left with a void that no foster family could fill. At 16, he moved in with a kind couple, but Miriam's words became his compass, guiding him through the uncertainty of adolescence. He threw himself into his studies, particularly computers and coding. While other teens lost themselves in video games, Ethan was building them, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he wove lines of code into something tangible, something that could protect others the way he had been protected. By 18, Ethan's talent had outgrown the small town of Brookfield. He created a cybersecurity program so innovative that his teachers urged him to enter it in state competitions. It wasn't just a program, it was a shield, a way to safeguard the vulnerable in a world that often felt chaotic. By 19, investors were knocking, drawn to the quiet brilliance of a boy who had turned pain into purpose. By 22, Ethan Walker was no longer just the boy who survived. He had taken his grandmother's maiden name, Harris, as a tribute to the woman who raised him and redefined himself as Ethan Harris, founder and CEO of Sophie Security. His company revolutionized data protection, securing sensitive information for governments, hospitals, and businesses worldwide. Headlines hailed him as a tech prodigy, a visionary rising from a small town to Silicon Valley's spotlight. Yet, despite the accolades and wealth, Ethan's heart remained tethered to Brookfield, to the singed bracelet in the wooden box, and to the woman whose face still haunted his sketchbooks. She was the reason he pushed forward, the reason he built a life dedicated to protecting others. And though the world saw Ethan Harris as a success, he saw himself as a boy still searching for the woman who came back for him and for the courage to live up to her sacrifice. Ethan Harris had amassed a fortune and a reputation that reverberated through boardrooms and headlines, but no achievement could quiet the memory that anchored his soul. 20 years ago, a December night had nearly ended him, the flames of a burning cabin licking at his 6-year-old frame. Yet in that chaos, a stranger had emerged, a woman with a ponytail, her arms bloodied, her feet bare against the snow, who carried him to safety. The image of her face, fierce with determination yet softened by care, was etched into his mind, a beacon he could never outrun. Her sacrifice stirred a restless gratitude in him, a need to find her that pulsed beneath every decision, every triumph. Behind the polished exterior of his San Francisco office, where the bay sparkled under a relentless sun, Ethan waged a quiet war to uncover her identity. He hired private investigators who pored over hospital records, chasing leads on burn treatments from that fateful night. He tracked down witnesses, their memories faded but precious, and sent anonymous donations to the Brookfield Fire Department, hoping to jog someone's recollection. In his sleek tower office, among trophies of his success, a small wooden box sat on a shelf, unremarkable to the untrained eye. Inside lay a cotton bracelet, its threads worn and singed, a relic of the night that defined him. His staff whispered about it, calling it a lucky charm. To Ethan, it was a sacred vow, a tangible link to the woman who had given him everything. In interviews, journalists often circled his past, sensing a story beneath his guarded demeanor. "What drives you, Ethan?" they'd ask. Their voices eager, their notebooks open. "What keeps you grounded amid all this?" He'd pause, his fingers brushing the edge of the wooden box, a wistful smile flickering across his face. "There's someone I owe everything to," he'd say, his tone steady but weighted with a depth that silenced follow-up questions. The words were a shield, protecting a truth too personal to unravel fully. Once, a bold reporter leaned closer, eyes glinting with curiosity. "If you could go back in time, what's the one thing you'd change?" Ethan's response was immediate, his gaze drifting to a place only he could see. "I'd find the woman who saved my life," he said, "and I'd tell her what she gave me. Not just a life, but a purpose to make it mean something." His employees learned to tread lightly around the topic, sensing the quiet intensity it evoked. His closest confidants, loyal and discreet, respected the boundary, but Ethan's search burned on, a fire that no amount of success could extinguish. Then a breakthrough came, fragile as a whisper but heavy with promise. A Brookfield reporter, digging into the history of the town's old fire station for a human interest piece, uncovered a name: Rachel Morgan. She was 49, a quiet woman who worked at a local bakery, her life a tapestry of routine woven over a past marked by burns and unexplained injuries from 20 years ago. Once a fire department dispatcher, she had faded into the background, her heroism buried beneath the weight of time. The discovery sent ripples through Ethan's world. An envelope was dispatched, a photograph tucked inside. When Rachel opened it in her small apartment, the world seemed to tilt. The grainy image captured her younger self, ponytail askew, arms streaked with blood, feet bare in the snow, clutching a boy as flames roared behind her. Her heart stuttered, memories rushing back like a dam breaking. She had buried that night, locked it away, to survive the pain and the questions it left behind. Yet here it was, staring back at her, a moment she had never claimed as her own, but that had shaped her in ways she could barely articulate. In his glass-walled office, Ethan held the same photograph, his pulse racing with a cocktail of hope and dread. For 20 years, he had carried the weight of not knowing, of searching without answers. Now, with a name and a face confirmed, he prepared to return to Brookfield, to the town where his life had been spared. The homecoming was unlike anything the small Vermont town had ever witnessed. On a crisp autumn morning, 4 black SUVs glided down Main Street, their polished surfaces gleaming under the golden sun. Locals lined the sidewalks, their whispers buzzing with curiosity and excitement. Reporters from regional stations, national networks, and even international outlets descended, their cameras flashing, their microphones ready to capture the unfolding mystery. Ethan emerged from the second SUV, his navy coat simple, his jeans unpretentious, his windswept hair betraying a nervous energy beneath his composed exterior. Despite his wealth and fame, he moved through the crowd with a quiet humility, nodding to the mayor, shaking hands with the fire chief, his eyes scanning the faces around him. He was no longer just a titan of industry. He was a man returning to the place where his story began, searching for the woman who had rewritten his fate. At the old Brookfield fire station, a podium awaited, a portable screen set up beside it. Ethan stepped forward, the crowd falling into a reverent hush. His gaze swept over the sea of faces, searching for the one that had haunted his dreams for 2 decades. When he spoke, his voice carried across the square, steady, but laced with a vulnerability that made the air feel heavier. 20 years ago, he began, I was a terrified 6-year-old boy, trapped in a burning cabin on Pinerest Road. The experts said I had less than 2 minutes to live. The fire department was 7 minutes away. By every measure, I shouldn't be standing here today. The crowd leaned in, captivated, their breath held in collective anticipation. But someone, a stranger, changed that math. She defied the odds and gave me a future. A soft beep sounded and the screen flickered to life, revealing grainy security footage. The image showed a woman, barefoot and bloodied, her ponytail swinging as she carried a child from a burning house. Gasps rippled through the audience. some covering their mouths, others whispering to neighbors. Ethan's voice softened, trembling with the weight of memory. For 20 years, I've searched for her. I've scoured hospital records, old news archives, even bakery staff rosters. A faint, almost shy smile touched his lips. I didn't know her name, but I never forgot her face. He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out the small wooden box with a reverence that silenced the crowd. With deliberate care, he opened it and lifted the singed cotton bracelet, holding it up for the cameras. The fragile threads seemed to glow in the sunlight, a relic of a moment that had bound two lives together. This fell from her wrist as she carried me to safety, he said, his voice thick with emotion. It's been my reminder every day of what courage looks like, what selflessness means. His eyes scanned the crowd again, searching, hoping, his heart pounding with the possibility that she was there, listening, watching, the woman who had given him everything now just a breath away from being found. Ethan stood at the podium, his hands gripping its edges as if to anchor himself against the flood of memories surging within. His voice, steady at first, began to quiver, each word laced with a raw, unshakable emotion that seemed to ripple through the crisp autumn air. He spoke of a woman whose courage had redefined his life, a woman whose name he had carried in his heart for 2 decades. His announcement was deliberate, each syllable weighted with purpose. He had purchased the old Brookfield fire station and its surrounding land, intent on transforming it into a cutting-edge emergency response center. But his vision came with a single heartfelt condition, one he had pleaded with the town council to honor. The center would bear the name of the woman who, 20 years ago, had shown him, and everyone else, the true meaning of bravery. As he stepped back, his breath uneven, Ethan's eyes scanned the crowd, searching, hoping. Rachel Morgan, he said, his voice breaking slightly. If you're out there, this is for you. At the far edge of the town square, beneath the gnarled branches of an ancient maple tree, where fiery autumn leaves drifted lazily to the ground, Rachel stood motionless. Her heart thundered in her chest, a relentless drumbeat that drowned out the murmurs of the crowd. Her hands, clenched at her sides, trembled with a mixture of fear and disbelief. She hadn't meant to be here. She had convinced herself that watching the ceremony from the safety of her living room, shielded by the glow of her television screen, would be enough. Yet, when the moment arrived, an inexplicable force, stronger than her fear, deeper than her resolve to remain unseen, had drawn her to this place. Now, Ethan's words washed over her, each one piercing the walls she had built around her past. Her breath caught as she took a hesitant step forward. The crowd parted, their whispers rising like a soft tide, and Rachel, almost without thinking, rolled up her left sleeve. The silvery scars that spiraled up her arm gleamed faintly in the sunlight, a silent testament to the woman in the grainy video that had haunted Ethan's memory for years. Their eyes met across the square, and for a fleeting moment, time seemed to collapse. The terrified boy from 20 years ago, and the woman who had risked everything to save him stood face to face, now adults shaped by the weight of their shared history. Ethan's breath hitched, his fingers tightening around the worn cotton bracelet he held. A relic of that day, now slightly frayed but heavy with meaning. Rachel's voice, when she spoke, was low and rough, frayed by nerves she could barely contain. You kept it all this time, she said, her words barely above a whisper. Ethan's lips curved into a small, tremulous smile, his eyes glistening. It was all I had left of you, he replied, his voice thick with the weight of 20 years of gratitude, guilt, and quiet reverence. The crowd erupted, their applause rolling through Main Street like a wave, punctuated by the soft sounds of sniffles and muffled sobs. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Others clapped with a fervor that spoke of shared pride and awe. At the edge of the throng, Rachel's daughter, Sophie, now a young woman with her mother's fierce spirit, pushed through the crowd. Her face was a mosaic of laughter and tears as she flung her arms around Rachel, holding her tightly as if to anchor her in this overwhelming moment. In that embrace, Rachel felt something shift deep within her, a truth she had long buried. Her story, her scars, her courage, they didn't have to remain locked away. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that her quiet act of bravery could belong to the world, that it could inspire, heal, and endure. The grand opening of the Rachel Morgan Emergency Response Center was a spectacle unlike anything Brookfield had ever witnessed. Fire trucks lined the streets, their polished chrome catching the golden rays of the autumn sun. Children darted through the crowd, waving tiny flags that fluttered like bursts of color against the clear blue sky. Families sprawled on blankets across the town square, sharing laughter and stories, while the local high school band played a gentle, uplifting melody that seemed to weave the day together. Yet, amidst the fanfare, the true heart of the ceremony was Rachel herself. For the first time in decades, she stood before her community unhidden, unashamed. Her arms, once always concealed beneath long sleeves, now bore their scars openly. She wore a simple short-sleeved blouse, the silvery lines on her skin catching the light like quiet emblems of her resilience. As she approached the podium, a hush fell over the crowd, the air thick with anticipation. Rachel's voice when she spoke was steady, though her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. She began softly, her words carrying a vulnerability that made the crowd lean in, hanging on every syllable. "I never wanted to be seen," she admitted, her gaze drifting across the sea of faces, old neighbors, young strangers, and Sophie standing near the stage with a proud, tear-streaked smile. "I thought it was enough to know, deep in my heart, that I'd done what was right, that I hadn't stood still when someone needed me." She paused, her fingers brushing the edge of the podium as she gathered her thoughts. "But I've learned something standing here today. Sharing our stories matters because courage isn't about being unafraid. It's about feeling that fear, letting it shake you to your core, and choosing to act anyway." The crowd roared with applause, their cheers echoing through the square. Ethan joined her on the stage, his hand resting gently on her shoulder in a gesture of quiet solidarity. Together, they lifted a framed display, the restored cotton bracelet now preserved behind glass, its simple threads a powerful symbol of sacrifice and hope. They presented it to the town, a tangible reminder of what one person's bravery could mean. The moment felt sacred, a shared vow to honor not just Rachel's courage, but the quiet heroism that lived in every corner of their community. In the year that followed, Rachel's life blossomed in ways she could never have imagined. Invitations poured in, asking her to speak at schools and community centers, where children listened wide-eyed as she shared her story. She found a new purpose working part-time at the emergency center, her calm, steady voice guiding young dispatchers through the chaos of crisis calls. Most profoundly, her bond with Sophie deepened, their shared journey forging a connection that no longer needed to hide behind closed doors. They rebuilt their lives together step by step, with a quiet strength that mirrored the courage Rachel had shown all those years ago. For Ethan, finding Rachel had brought a sense of closure he hadn't realized he needed. The bracelet, once a private touchstone he carried through his life, now hung in the main training room of the emergency center, beside a plaque that read, "Courage is a decision made in seconds that echoes across lifetimes." Those words became a mantra for the town, a reminder of the power of a single choice. Brookfield itself seemed to shift, its people awakened to the extraordinary lives led quietly among them. As residents passed the emergency center each day, they thought not only of Rachel and Ethan, but of every unsung hero who chose to act in moments that mattered most. Rachel, when speaking to young people, often shared a simple truth. "We all get a moment," she would say, her voice warm with conviction, "a moment that shows the world who we are. When yours comes, I hope you'll choose to be brave." Her words lingered, a gentle challenge to live with courage, to act with heart. Rachel Morgan's story became a beacon, a reminder that even the quietest act of bravery could send ripples through time, leaving a legacy that no one could ever forget.